Welcome back. Today we're going to look at video topic number 4 again. This time finding extrema, this part right here. And we're going to look at this function again. Maybe you still have it entered into your calculator. If not, put that function in your calculator. And we're going to answer this question number 2. Find all relative extrema. Find the absolute extrema on a specific interval or domain. Okay, so let's look at analyzing functions. The definition of extrema is basically our highs and lows. So I'm going to just write that. This is highs and lows. Okay, how high does the function go and how low does it go? Two types of extrema we want to look at. One is called relative extrema. That means we're only going to look in a small area for a low point. So this is a low point, and a low point really would hold water. So could hold water in there. But anyway, that is a low point. That is called a relative minimum. Okay, then we are going to look at that. Y value is really called the minimum. Okay, and then the maximum is right over here. There's a relative maximum. That is a high point. And it's called a relative maximum because it's not really the highest point on the function. There's higher points over here, but in that general vicinity, there's a bump. And that is a relative maximum. But really what we're looking for is the y value there. And these points occur at a specific place, but the relative minimum and maximum are just those y values. So we could name this point A, and we could say there's a relative minimum at point A, and there's a relative maximum at point B. Okay, so let's now look at absolute extrema. On absolute extrema, we have a specific domain where we're looking for an absolute maximum and minimum, usually. And that means we're looking for the highest place on the graph, on this blue part, the highest point and the lowest point. There's only one maximum and one minimum value. The highest point right here is what we call the maximum. Okay, that is an absolute maximum. The lowest point, it looks like it's right here, the lowest point on the graph. It's right here. We're going to call that the absolute minimum. So really, you're just looking in this region for the highest and lowest point on the graph. Okay, so between the points A and B, because that's our domain. So let's go back to the graphing calculator, and let's look at this graph right here. And to graph that, we're going to choose zoom standard, which is zoom 6, just to get a look at it. If you remember that goes down, comes back up, and it does some wiggling around this x equals 0. Let's practice our zoom box there. So I'm going to choose zoom box, which is zoom 1. And I'm going to put my cursor. I kind of want to stretch it out a little bit. So that means it's going to be kind of a flat box. And that'll stretch out the y values a little bit so I can see it. And there's a box, something like that. Enter. It's going to graph that. And you could hardly see the maximum minimum. It looks like it just comes above and below. You could always do it again in a zoom box. That's 1. So the upper left first, and if you really want to stretch that out, don't go very high. You really want a flat box to stretch out the y values. You can see it a little bit better. There we go. Okay, now we can see it coming up and going down on our graph. So see if you could get that on yours. Now what I'm going to do is calculate a maximum and minimum. We're going to find the relative maximum minimum of this graph. So second and trace button is to calculate. So there it is. And let's do the maximum first, which is number 4. Now it's asking for the left bound again. The left bound has to be to the left side of that maximum. Enter. The right bound to the right side of that maximum. Hit enter. Now it says guess, so I usually just steer it back to the maximum there. It tells me the x and the y values. Okay, so there they are, the x and the y values of that maximum. Now I wrote down the relative maximum that we found, and remember that's the y value, that's the high point, and it occurs at x equals this number, negative 0.184, but really the relative maximums here in blue, that's the high point. Okay, let's go back and find a minimum value. So to do that, we're just going to hit calculate again, so second trace, and we're going to choose 3. Put the cursor to the right, well actually to the left side of the maximum, hit enter, or the minimum, and to the right side of the minimum, hit enter. And then when it says guess, you could go back to where that is and hit enter. There's our relative minimum. So what I would like you to do is go find that other minimum. Then write it down. So you can pause the video while you do that. Then I'll show you the answers. Okay, here's the relative minimum that we found, maximum that we found first, the relative minimum that we found together second, and here's the one that yours is to find on your own. I actually used a zoom fit from -10 to 0 to kind of get that pictured in there, but you might have done something differently. Anyway, there it is, relative maximums and minimums. Now we need to look at that other part, is the absolute extrema. This is actually a little bit easier. So if you look at our domain here, our domain goes from 0 to 0.5. So we could enter into our window settings 0 and 0.5 for x minimum and x maximum. Then we're going to hit zoom 0 and hit enter. As you can see, the absolute minimum occurs right down here, right there, and we could find that value by calculating minimum like we did before. The absolute maximum occurs here at an end point, and we could find that value by calculating value, the values. I'm just going to do that one. Second, calculate 1, and we want to find out what the y coordinate is when x is at the rightmost point of that domain, which is 0.5. So I'm going to enter 0.5, hit enter, and it gives me at 0.5, that's the maximum value. I can also find those values if I look at the window. Now the window will automatically set the absolute maximum and the absolute minimum for the window of that region, unless there's an asymptote. So you have to be careful that you're seeing the whole graph. But if you are, look at, there's the absolute maximum and the absolute minimum right there in the y min and y max. So here are our final answers. We have the absolute minimum was this value, 0.08125. The absolute maximum is this value. Remember that when I ask for the relative or the absolute extrema, you just have to give the y coordinate unless I ask you where it occurs. So that concludes our video, and I hope you learned a lot. See you next time.